Have you ever wondered if you could actually prove that God exists? I'm not talking about faith or scripture, but about using pure, cold, hard logic. Well, today we're going on that exact journey, exploring some of the most powerful philosophical arguments ever devised.
Everything, and I mean everything, really starts with this one question. Seriously, stop and think about it for a second. Why is there a universe? Why is there, well, anything at all? Why not just an empty, silent void of nothing? This is the ultimate starting pistol for our entire investigation.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look for a cosmic starting line, the first cause. Then, we'll dive into the evidence that the universe itself had a day one. From there, we'll switch gears to a pure logic puzzle. Then, we'll tackle the one big question everyone asks. And we'll wrap up with the absolutely mind-bending idea of self-existence. Let's get into it. Okay, first up, the first cause question. We're going to start by looking at the world right in front of us, following a trail of breadcrumbs that philosophers have been on for thousands of years.
This brings us to something called the cosmological argument. Now, it sounds fancy, but it's based on a really simple idea that even ancient thinkers like Aristotle pointed out. Stuff doesn't just pop into existence out of thin air. Every effect has a cause. This argument just takes that simple logic and applies it to the biggest effect we know of, the entire universe.
The philosopher Thomas Aquinas laid this out perfectly way back in the 13th century. He said, look around, things are moving. But nothing moves all by itself. It has to be pushed or pulled, right? Think of it like a line of dominoes. Each one is knocked over by the one before it. But, and here's the kicker, that line of dominoes can't just go back forever and ever. That's an infinite regress, and it just doesn't make sense. You have to, logically, have a first domino, something that started the whole chain reaction without being pushed itself, an unmoved mover. Now, let's fast forward to a more modern take on this idea. This one focuses less on the chain of events and more on the idea that the entire chain had a definite starting point. This is called the Kalam cosmological argument, and it's beautifully simple. Just 3 steps. Step 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Seems pretty obvious, right? Things don't just appear. Step 3 logically follows. Therefore, the universe has a cause. So you see, the entire weight of this argument rests on that second premise. Can we actually prove that the universe began to exist? And this is where it gets really compelling, because the evidence comes from 2 completely different directions. On the one hand, you have philosophers who argue that an actual infinite past is a logical impossibility. You just can't have an infinite number of past events in reality. But then, on the other hand, you have modern science. The Big Bang Theory points to an absolute beginning, and the second law of thermodynamics tells us the universe is like a giant wind-up clock that's slowly running down. And if it's running down, well, it can't have been ticking forever. Somebody had to wind it up at the start. Yeah, this quote from physicist P.C.W. Davies really nails it. He says, look, whether we like it or not, the physics tells us that all the energy in the universe was just kind of put in at the very beginning. It had to start with a full tank of gas because it's been running on that initial fuel ever since.
Okay, let's switch gears completely. We've been looking out at the cosmos for clues. Now we're going to look inward at an argument that has nothing to do with physics and everything to do with pure logic. The question is, can you literally define God into existence?
This is the ontological argument, and it's a real mind-bender. It all starts with this definition from St. Anselm. God is that than which no greater can be conceived. In other words, the greatest, most perfect being you can possibly imagine. Now follow the logic here. What's greater? A perfect being that exists only in your imagination, or a perfect being that exists in your imagination and in reality? Obviously, the one that actually exists is greater. So Anselm says, if God is truly the greatest conceivable being, he must exist in reality. Because if he only existed in our minds, we could conceive of something greater, one that also existed in the real world. The philosopher René Descartes made a similar point. He said, think about a triangle. Part of its very definition, its essence, is having 3 sides and angles that add up to 180 degrees. You can't imagine a triangle without those properties. Well, Descartes argued that for a supremely perfect being, existence is one of those essential properties. So for him, saying a perfect God doesn't exist is as logically nonsensical as saying a triangle without 3 sides. It's a contradiction.
But hold on a second, right? It feels like a bit of a magic trick. Can you really just define something into reality? I mean, I can define the perfect pizza as one that has all my favorite toppings and also exists on my table right now, but that doesn't make it suddenly appear. It's a pretty powerful objection. And the philosopher Immanuel Kant is famous for hitting this nail on the head.
He argued that existence isn't a property or a predicate, like being red or heavy or powerful. Saying something exists doesn't add to its description. It just asserts that there's a real thing in the world that matches that description. For Kant, you simply can't build a logical bridge from a concept in your mind to a real thing in the world.
All right, now it's time for the big one. The ultimate gotcha question that every skeptic asks, the one that seems to put the whole first cause argument in checkmate.
And there it is. And you know what? It's a perfectly logical question. It seems to follow directly from everything we've talked about. It's a powerful challenge, for sure. But it turns out classical theology has a very specific and pretty profound answer that completely reframes the problem.
And that answer isn't some clever dodge. It's a deep dive into the nature of being itself. It's a concept called aseity, and it redefines what it even means for God to exist in the first place.
Aseity. It's pronounced Aseity, and it comes from Latin meaning from himself. The core idea is that God's existence doesn't come from anywhere else. He is self-existent. So theologians argue that asking who created God is what's known as a category error. It's like asking, what does the color blue smell like, or what's north of the North Pole? The question itself is flawed because it's applying the rules of created things to a being who is, by definition, uncreated.
The whole argument really hinges on this distinction between two types of beings. On one side, you have contingent beings. That's us. That's the planet, the sun, the galaxy. Our existence is contingent on something else. We have a beginning, and so we need a cause. But the argument proposes a second category, a necessary being. A necessary being, by its very definition, is not dependent on anything. It doesn't have a beginning. It's eternal. It's the ground of its own existence. The rule, everything needs a cause, only applies to the contingent stuff.
And this idea of aseity has some massive implications. It's not just one simple thing. It means God is totally independent. He can't be created or destroyed. He's the ultimate first cause we were looking for earlier. It means he's outside of time, so asking what came before him is totally meaningless. And maybe the most mind-bending part is this idea of divine simplicity. That God isn't made up of different parts. His very essence is his existence. It's a huge, profound concept.
And this philosophical concept is also found all over the Bible. You see it when Paul is in Athens, saying, God doesn't need anything from us, since he gives us everything. You see it in the Psalms, where God says the whole world and everything in it is his. And of course, there's that incredible moment in Exodus, where God reveals his name not as a title, but as a statement of being. I am who I am. It's pure, self-sufficient existence.
But the debate doesn't stop there. Richard Dawkins offers a powerful modern rebuttal. He basically flips the script. He argues that if you think the universe is too complex to have happened by chance and must have a designer, well then, what about the designer? Any intelligence capable of creating a whole universe must be infinitely more complex and improbable than the universe itself, and therefore would be in even greater need of an explanation.
And this really gets to the absolute core of the disagreement. The two sides are essentially talking past each other because they're working with two totally different definitions of God. Proponents of Aseity would argue that Dawkins' point is valid only if God is a complex being made of parts within time and space. But their definition is of a simple, non-physical, necessary being who exists outside of time and space. So they'd say the who designed the designer argument completely misses the mark. It all comes down to what you mean by the word God.
So, where does all this leave us? We've journeyed from cosmic dominoes to the birthday of the universe, from pure definitions to the very nature of existence. And it leads to one final question. Are these arguments rock-solid proofs for God, or are they something else entirely? Are they just maps that show us the absolute edge of human reason, the exact point where our logic runs out and all we're left with is mystery? That's something for you to decide.